Hi, this is Lokati. We're doing a video on our Forge Guard Rive build. It is petless using the new scrap metal node that turns your Forge Guard forged weapons into a bonus for your character. We're using Rive on the Void Cleave primarily to do damage around the map. We're using Lunge as our main movement skill, and we are periodically summoning wards to give us a bonus to our damage through the sigils. So we're keeping our sigils up as we're playing. We're using Ryu and Void Creep to do damage, and then we're just running around the map with a Lunge. Damage is pretty good. Defenses are pretty solid. You still have a risk versus AoE from large groups of mobs and ranged characters hitting you with abilities where you're not in there in melee. Most of our recovery is coming from healing hands on hit with all of our melee skills. And so healing hands is doing both damage and healing for us. We're using a peak of the mountain, so we don't have any leech from our melee skills unless they are non-critting, and we got pretty high crits, so there's not a lot of that leech coming through. So like I said, we're primarily relying on healing hands for our recovery. We also have volatile reprisal, or volatile reversal for increased damage on things like this exiled mage here, as well as on bosses. Void Cleave is applying critical vulnerability to the target. That plus the nodes that we have for crit on the Rive ability itself, and the peak of the mountain in our Forge Guard passives are what's getting us to basically crit cap on the third strike of Rive, and really close to crit cap on the second strike of it. So crit multi is important to us, so we are wearing the Solaron's boots, so we have that crit multi there. And you can see we fly through most of these monoliths pretty smoothly, without too much difficulty. Get back over here in town, get our terrible rewards, and nothing exciting. We'll go over where the build is right now. And so for a weapon, we've got a Warrior's Orbit Cleaver passive. This is one of the new bases that became available. There's high melee damage, high increased physical damage, increased minion physical damage, which you don't care about. And then we have melee attack speed, T6 increased fizz, shred armor, and ignite on it. We would have liked to have put a frailty on here. That would have been a big benefit for us, but we didn't get that on this weapon. Now, this is our choice because of the increased physical damage and the T6 passive for increased physical damage. Because on Rive, Oak Cleaver doubles the effect of damage stats and ailment stats. So this weapon is 390% fizz damage times 2, which is almost 800% fizz damage. And it's almost 500% chance to shred armor and almost 200% chance to ignite. And so this weapon is really key. You've got to get a good Orbit Cleaver or a good Obsidian Axe. Now, you don't have to run the attack speed, but I like the way it feels. You could run melee physical damage or melee percent damage or anything else that is going to be an increase to your damage, but the melee attack speed feels really good on the build. For our helmet, we are absolutely using a peak of the mountain. This is most of our critical strike chance scaling. You can ignore my amulet, it's terrible. You can ignore my ring, it's terrible. You can ignore my quicksilver coil, it's terrible. I've had bad luck on rings and amulets on this guy, and so we don't have any of those. I do have a decent spider silk sash of the ox, which is helping us cap our resist and get some increased health. But there are better items that we want for this slot. Solaron's Step, like I said, gives us a huge crit strike multiplier that is good. We have tons of fizz resist, so the 75% fizz resist penalty is very easy for us to overcome. My code of the Erased Sentinel will increase crit strike chance, minion damage, and 65% fizz res, which is helping us with the Solaron's Step here. You want to use one of these for the +1 essential skills, the increased armor, and the mitigation applies to damage, because we are using a lot of armor on this build. Now I've got a swaddling of the erased here, just because I happen to have I was leveling and it rolled this great melee damage, leached his health. But since we've added in Peak of the Mountain, that's not really doing anything for us. We would much rather have a Boulder Fist here with very good rolls on it for the health and the armor, as well as getting some legendary potential to add stats onto that. Now, my body armor I'm using is +4 to Rive. The rest of the rolls on it aren't great, and as you can see, we are way overcapped on all our resistances. But the +4 to Rive is really important. You want something with a lot of armor on here. This is if you are going the offensive route for this build. Now, I may post builds later that are more defensive routes. You can use Sunforged Cuirass instead of the +4 to Rive, and that'll lower your damage a little bit because you'll lose out on these 4 nodes of Rive are the ones that you would give up in order to wear the Sunforged Cuirass. Whenever we have that equipped, so normally we would have this up, and we would have this up, and we would have this up, and we would give up these nodes, which get us to the kill threshold and the pulls enemies in and increased third strike damage and increased strike 2 damage. So those nodes are what we would sacrifice in order to wear a more defensive chest piece like the Sunforged Cuirass. And you could even go more defensive by not using scrap metal, summoning your forged weapons, and running the 2-piece bonus on this, which gives you access to the Sunforged Helmet. The Sunforged Helmet gives you more armor and more healing passively through having forged weapons out. But for this build right now, we're going more offensive on that road there. Our idols here, getting a health stout idols. I've got some resistances on these, but we'd rather have double health stealth idols. And getting crit strike multiplier with judgment are good here. I went with increased armor as a secondary node, but if you wanted to go more offensive, you could do the shred armor, increased effect from shred armor here, and that would be more damage. So you've got a lot of little ways that you can tweak the build for more damage or more defenses. And there's a lot of options that you have for turning those dials and kind of making the character better for the content that you're doing or the gear you have access to. Like if you don't have a +4 Rive body armor, Sunforged Cuirass is very easy to come by. And you can see right here, our armor is 2,400 right now. Switching back over to the Sunforged Cuirass pushes up to 3,700. And so you've got some options for flexibility in moving those things around. Now for our skills, we are running Sigils of Hope, we are running Rive, we are running Void Cleave, we are running Healing Hands, and we are running Volatile Reversal. Volatile Reversal is giving us attack speed and enemy damage taken up to 60% if you hit him with both the incipient Void Rift and the base Void Rift from Volatile Reversal. Healing Hands is proccing off of every melee attack we have, which is Rive, Void Cleave, and Lunge. This is going to be doing an attack that does melee fire damage, which is a reasonable amount. It's hitting around 3 to 5k for us right now. And it's doing the base healing. We're increasing healing effectiveness here, increasing healing effectiveness here, giving us spell damage per increased healing effectiveness, which converts over to damage with Seraph Blade. And then we are getting 10% less void damage taken and 10% less necrotic damage taken. So this is a very good ability that is just automated through Rive, Void Cleave, and Lunge. On our Void Cleave itself, we're using this for the crit strike vulnerability stacks. We're using physical damage increases fire damage, so our Void Cleave hits very hard. Usually 6 to 8k crits, 12 to 15k. We are increasing the damage for bleed because we are getting a lot of bleeds out due to the Forge Guard passive. And then we are doing the armor shred stacks here with the armor shred effect and duration. So this Void Cleave hits but more importantly, it is scaling the damage of our healing hands and our. And so this is a very important skill to keep on cooldown. Use it all the time. You can move some points around here and go to Nether Charge, which gives you additional charges. It starts to hurt our mana a little bit, but this is great for burst damage to be able to get 10 armor stacks and 6 stacks of the crit vulnerability very quickly on bosses or very tough opponents like that. Again, Rive here, we're doing ignites. We do more hit damage versus ignited enemies, and then after we hit them with our third from Rive, we're also getting physical penetration per ignite consumed. We're usually maintaining somewhere around 40 to 60 stacks of this with the build as is, and that could be higher. That is 40 to 60 stacks, 3% fizz pin, which is 120 to 180% fizz pin. So this is about a ×2 multiplier for us on increasing our damage. Now, we took off our plus Rive armor, so that has messed with our Rive skill points. We'll put these back in. But we take our crit points here, increase to the first and second strike, and we go all the way over here to scrap metal, and then we go all the way over here to our kill threshold. And so Rive is doing most of our damage, and it's our kill threshold, and it's giving us a bunch of fizz pin, which is buffing the damage of Rive and buffing the damage of Void Bleed. Sigils of Hope is our last option here. And Sigils of Hope, we are relying mostly on this node, which is 150% increased global melee damage for 3 seconds after we cast Sigils of Hope. We're also getting some damage increase here, more maximum here, some automate for our sigils while running around in the monolith itself, and we'll be getting some additional ignite chance for scaling our physical penetration. Now you could skip over this additional ignite chance, come down here, go to cast speed, and then over to instant cast. That would give you more sustained damage because you're removing the cast time for Sigils of Hope, but it's already very expensive and it's already very taxing on our mana. And this makes things a little bit more complicated in a monolith. Now, on a boss fight, it makes it better because you'd have more uptime on the boss, but really you'll just be casting this while you're doing some dodging and then diving back in to do burst damage during a 3-second window after you cast Sigils of Hope. So I don't think this is necessary, but that is the way that you could go with it. For our passive tree, our Sentinel tree, we're only level 80 right now, so this is nowhere near complete. So we've gone over to taking our health gain and mana gain when we're arriving. Under forward guard, we take our fizz resistance when hit and increased armor when we're hit. We come down here and take strength into bleed and ignite chance, which is doubled with our two-handed weapon. This node I need to remove and put over here. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but that is in the build guide. We take strength crit and crit multi, as well as more melee damage per hit taken in the last 10 seconds. On our paladin tree, we go fizz pin and physical damage. This also increases our healing hands fire damage and fire pin for healing hands. And then we take more melee ignite chance just so we can get to Sigils of Hope down here. And in our void knight tree, we're taking in our abyssal endurance over to void corruption. If you don't need the void resistance, physical resistance, and health, these points can be moved over to sorrow and steel. Once you get to level 100, we will be taking some points in sorrow and steel. These points can then be moved down here to devouring blade. And so you've got some flexibility for moving those things around. Same here with forge guard. If you don't need the physical resistance of the armor, these points can be moved down here for more offensive stats. So this is how we're going to build out our passives. Our guide that is linked below will have a breakdown of everything. And so we've got our guide set up here, as well as our ideal weapons. We have an obsidian axe. We have our peak of the mountain with increased shred armor effect. We have our omnis to help cover skill bonuses and resistances, as well as crit strike chance. We are using a Titan heart here with +4 levels of drive on it. This gives us more defenses, more increased health. Lowers our armor a little bit, but ends up being a very, very solid choice. Again, using opal rings with strength, increased strike chance, health, resistances, with spiders of sash for increased physical damage, cooldown recovery, health, as well as resistances. And then we have traversal skill cooldowns recovered on potion use. As kind of a filler here, that affix, you can use a lot of stuff. You can use increased fire damage, you can use a different experimental affix. You can move this experimental affix down. You have a lot of flexibility there. Over here, another opal ring. We use this to help cap our critical strike avoidance. And then we have boulder fists here with increased health and T6 hybrid health slammed on it. And so these give us a huge chunk of health and armor. And then our solar on step with a fizz resistance modifier slammed on it to help with our fizz resistance. Although that's not really necessary. You have a lot of flexibility here as well. Ton of fizz resistance. And then the code override sigil, and you'll play around with these and kind of get what you're looking for. Buy 2 or 3 of them or find 2 or 3 of them and build one until it has good stats for you. Again, these are the only 4 important ones on here. And then in these ones, you're going to use fillers. Armor, health, resistances, things you need to round out your build. Over here on blessings, we did take lightning resistance so that we didn't have to put lightning resistance on a belt, which helped give us cooldown recovery. With crit multi here, but you don't need to take crit multi here. You may want to take chance to ignite if you want more fizz pin and you feel like that's better for your build than the crit multi is. You could also come down here and take health if you wanted more defensive on here. You can take increased critical strike chance if you just don't have enough crit strike chance on your build. You got a lot of options on what to take on this node right here. Critical strike avoidance is mandatory with 1 T6 critical strike avoidance to cap that. And then right here we have grand body of obsidian. Again, this isn't necessary if you don't have frailty, fractured, or sealed on your weapon. Then you can take this to apply frailty to your weapon instead. And then over here we have chance to shred physical resistance. This is going to be the best one out of here. You can take the cold resistance if you just don't have the cold resistance somewhere. You can take the fizz resistance if you just don't have the fizz resistance somewhere. But our shred physical resistance is going to be very important to our overall damage. Now this puts our offenses very, very solid. Our crit multiplier is 426% base. Our critical strike chance is 32% base. All this is going to, with the voice, cleave, crit vulnerability, and the rise, puts a thick cap on rise. Our fizz damage is 864% base, plus another 400% from our weapon, which is putting us up at 1264%. Our 101 melee damage is also being doubled by Clove Cleaver, so we're getting 210 melee damage flat. So we don't need melee damage from anywhere else. And so lots of these multiplicative buckets that we're filling, which lets our ride hit very, very hard. As far as play on the build, just Rive and Void Cleave 100% of the time. We need to change this over to Sigils of Hope. There we go. Sigils of Hope. And so Rive and Void Cleave most of the time. One for getting around. Sigils of Hope for burst damage. Bottle reversal for burst damage. Fairly simple, straightforward build to play. Great clearing, great survivability, and a tremendous amount of boss damage. Bosses are just going to melt. You'll be able to stand in and tank most everything. Damage over times are being mitigated here. You could slam on a damage over time affix on here, or you could not use Boulder Fists and use the new base item that gives damage over time mitigation with armor and an affix for damage over time mitigation with armor. So you could probably get somewhere around 60% of your armor, almost 70%, applies to damage over time. Again, Peak of the Mountain and Titan Heart, these are your offensive choices. We could switch these and go with Sunforged Set Helm here, and Sunforged Cuirass here, and get a lot more armor. These two items will put us at armor cap while we're in battle, give us an 85% damage mitigation, and then a ton of healing over here. and then you would come into Rive if you did that, and you would take a point out of, you would take 2 points out of here and put 1 point in your third strike always crits. And then we would need to take 1 point out of scrap metal here. And then we would take 1 point out of here maybe because we would lose the +4 ride. So I think instead we just lose all of this, take 1 point out of here, stick it down here. So probably ideally we lose the kill threshold and this little quality of life stuff, and we lose 1 point from here, and we put focus strike so that our third strike always crits. It will no longer be crit capping with a feat, and then get rid of our scrap metal so we actually have forged weapons out. In that case, we would be much more defensive with those setups. A lot of variations on the build. This one is a nice hybrid, very offensive, but also very defensive build. If you're looking for any changes to it, or if you have any questions, just shoot me a message. Come find me on Twitch. I'm happy to help out anytime. Thank you very much for watching. Y'all have an absolutely wonderful day.